The moment that wealthy woman struck me across the face in front of the entire shopping district, calling me worthless trash who didn't deserve to breathe the same air as decent people. She had no idea she was attacking the wife of the most powerful man in the country. Little did this cruel socialite know, her moment of sadistic pleasure would cost her everything she held dear. This is the story of how karma delivered the most brutal revenge imaginable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Hi, I'm Elena, and if you've ever been judged, humiliated, or treated like you don't matter because of your circumstances, this story will show you that justice always finds a way. Make sure you watch until the very end, because what my husband did to destroy this woman's entire world will leave you speechless and prove that some people should never underestimate the power of true love and unlimited resources. It all started 8 months ago, when my world completely fell apart. I was 24, 7 months pregnant, and sleeping in my car after losing everything in what I thought was the worst betrayal of my life. My best friend Cassandra had stolen my life savings, my apartment lease was in her name, and she disappeared with my boyfriend Jake, leaving me with nothing but a suitcase of clothes and a broken heart. What nobody knew, not even Cassandra, was that 3 months earlier, I had married the love of my life in a private ceremony. His name is Alexander Thornfield, and he's the CEO of Thornfield Industries, a global empire worth over $40 billion. We had met at a small coffee shop where I worked part-time while studying art therapy. He came in every Tuesday and Thursday, always ordering the same black coffee and sitting in the corner booth, working on his laptop. For weeks, I thought he was just another businessman, maybe successful, but nothing prepared me for the truth. He was quiet, kind, and treated me like I was the most important person in the world. When he finally asked me out, I said yes because of how he made me feel, not because of what he owned. Our relationship blossomed in secret because Alexander had learned the hard way that women often wanted his money more than his heart. When he proposed 6 months after our first date, he made me promise something that seemed strange at the time. He wanted our marriage to remain secret until after our first child was born. He explained that his previous relationships had been destroyed by gold diggers and fortune hunters, and he needed to know that our love was real before exposing me to the dangers of his world. I agreed, because I loved him, not his wealth, and I understood his need for protection. We were married in a simple ceremony with just 2 witnesses, a judge, and the most beautiful vows I'd ever heard. Alexander promised to love me whether we had everything or nothing, and I promised the same. He bought me a modest apartment under a false name, gave me a simple wedding ring that I wore on a chain around my neck, hidden under my clothes, and we planned to reveal our marriage after our baby arrived. That was before Cassandra destroyed my life. She had somehow discovered the apartment, forged documents, and legally stolen everything I thought I owned. When I tried to call Alexander, I discovered she had also destroyed my phone and taken my laptop. I was too proud and too shocked to reach out to him immediately. I thought I could handle it myself, find a solution, maybe stay with other friends until I figured things out. But pride has a way of making bad situations worse. My other friends were either too busy with their own lives or simply couldn't help someone who was pregnant and suddenly homeless. The few shelters I contacted had months-long waiting lists. Social services moved slower than I could afford with a baby coming. Day by day, my options disappeared until I found myself living in my old Honda Civic, parking in different locations each night to avoid being noticed. The pregnancy made everything harder. Morning sickness that lasted all day, swollen feet, constant exhaustion, and the growing fear that I was failing my unborn child before she even arrived. I had managed to keep my part-time job at a small grocery store, but the pay barely covered gas and food. I was saving every penny for baby supplies, sleeping in my car, and showering at a 24-hour gym that cost $15 a month. Alexander thought I was staying with family in another state, dealing with a personal emergency I had texted him about before losing my phone. I had asked for space to handle family drama, and being the respectful man he was, he gave it to me. He had no idea I was living a nightmare just 30 miles from his penthouse, too ashamed and stubborn to reach out for help. 3 weeks into this hell, I was walking through the Meridian shopping plaza, trying to find a public bathroom, when I made the mistake of sitting down on a bench to rest. My feet were killing me. My back ached, and I just needed 5 minutes to catch my breath. The bench was outside an expensive boutique called Vivienne's, where a single dress probably cost more than I made in 6 months. That's when I saw her. Vivian Ashworth, though I didn't know her name yet. She was everything I wasn't at that moment. Perfectly dressed in a cream-colored designer suit that probably cost thousands, flawless makeup, expensive jewelry that sparkled in the afternoon sun, and an air of superiority that radiated from her like heat from a fire. She was in her early 40s, beautiful in that artificial way that comes from unlimited access to the best surgeons and cosmetologists money can buy. She emerged from the boutique carrying several bags that clearly contained more clothes than I owned, and she noticed me immediately. Not because I was doing anything wrong, but because I didn't belong in her world. My clothes were clean but obviously worn, my pregnant belly was visible under a simple sweater, and my tired appearance screamed of someone who was struggling. Vivian stopped walking and stared at me with undisguised disgust. She turned to her companion, a thin woman with short blonde hair who was clearly her friend, and whispered something that made them both laugh. I tried to ignore them, focusing on the small kicks my daughter was giving me, reminding me that I needed to stay strong for her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Excuse me," Vivian said, approaching me with her friend trailing behind. "This is a shopping area for paying customers, not a homeless shelter." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the ambient noise of the busy plaza like a knife. "There are services for people like you. You can't just lounge around here making legitimate shoppers uncomfortable." I looked up at her, trying to maintain my dignity. "I'm just resting for a moment. I'm not bothering anyone." My voice came out smaller than I intended, weakened by weeks of stress and exhaustion. "I'll move along in just a minute." "You'll move along now," Vivian snapped, her perfectly manicured finger pointing away from the bench like she was dismissing a servant. "Look at you. You're obviously homeless, probably on drugs, definitely a burden on society. This is a respectable establishment, and your presence here is inappropriate and frankly disgusting." Her friend nodded in agreement, pulling out her phone to record what was clearly about to become entertainment for her social media followers. "Vivian's right. There are shelters for people like you. Stop being lazy and get a job instead of begging for handouts in public spaces." I felt anger rising in my chest, but I also felt something else. The protective instinct of a mother who refuses to let anyone threaten her child's dignity. I stood up slowly, my hand instinctively moving to my belly. "I'm not begging for anything. I work full-time, I'm just tired, and I have every right to sit on a public bench." Vivian's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Full-time? Doing what exactly? Selling yourself on street corners? That's probably how you got knocked up by some deadbeat who abandoned you the minute things got real." Her voice was getting louder, drawing attention from other shoppers who were starting to slow down and watch the confrontation. "You don't know anything about me," I said, standing my ground despite feeling overwhelmed. "And you have no right to speak to me like that." "I have every right to protect my community from trash like you," Vivian shot back, stepping closer with a threatening posture. "Look at yourself. You're pathetic. Pregnant and homeless, probably living off taxpayer money, taking resources away from people who actually deserve help. Your child is going to grow up just like you, worthless, dependent, and useless to society." That's when something inside me snapped. She could insult me, humiliate me, even physically threaten me, but the moment she attacked my unborn daughter, she crossed a line that changed everything. "Don't you dare talk about my child," I said, my voice steady despite the tears building in my eyes. "Whatever problems you have with me, leave her out of it." Vivian smiled, a cold, cruel expression that transformed her beautiful features into something genuinely frightening. "Oh, did I hit a nerve? Poor little mama bear, can't even provide basic shelter for her cub. That baby would be better off taken away from you the moment it's born. At least then it might have a chance at a decent life instead of growing up with a mother who can't even afford an apartment." The small crowd that had gathered was murmuring now, some people looking uncomfortable with how cruel the exchange was becoming. But no one stepped in to help. This was entertainment to them, a real-life drama playing out in their safe, privileged world, where they could watch someone else's humiliation without having to get involved. I felt trapped, surrounded by strangers who saw me as nothing more than a spectacle, facing a woman whose cruelty seemed to have no limits. My daughter kicked hard inside me, as if she could sense the stress and danger surrounding us, and I made a decision that would haunt me for weeks afterward. I decided to walk away, to remove myself and my child from a situation that was escalating beyond my control. "I'm leaving," I said quietly, picking up the small bag that contained my few possessions. "There's no need for this to continue." But Vivian wasn't finished with me. As I turned to walk away, she grabbed my arm roughly, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin through my sweater. "Don't you dare walk away from me when I'm talking to you," she hissed. "I'm not done explaining exactly what kind of worthless piece of trash you are." I tried to pull my arm free, but her grip was surprisingly strong and the sudden movement caused me to stumble slightly. My pregnant body, already off balance and exhausted, struggled to compensate, and I had to catch myself against the bench to avoid falling. "Please let go of me," I said, fear creeping into my voice as I realized how unstable this woman really was. "Please let go of me," Vivian mocked in a high-pitched voice, imitating me like a schoolyard bully. "What are you going to do if I don't? Call the police? They'll just move you along anyway, once they see what you really are. A homeless drug addict who got herself pregnant and now wants sympathy from decent people." Her friend was still recording, laughing as she captured every moment of my humiliation. "This is going viral," she announced gleefully. "Everyone needs to see what happens when these people try to invade our spaces. Maybe if we shame them enough, they'll actually get their lives together." That's when Vivian did something that crossed every line of human decency. She raised her hand and slapped me across the face with enough force to snap my head to the side and send me stumbling backward. The sound echoed through the shopping plaza like a gunshot, instantly silencing every conversation within 50 feet. The crowd that had been murmuring and watching casually suddenly went completely quiet, shocked by the escalation to physical violence. My cheek burned with pain, and I could taste blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation, the rage, and the fear that coursed through my body as I realized how powerless I was in that moment. I was alone, vulnerable, carrying my precious daughter and facing a woman who clearly had no limits to her cruelty. "That's what happens when you don't show proper respect to your betters," Vivian announced to the crowd, her voice carrying across the now silent plaza. "Some people need to learn their place the hard way. Maybe next time this little tramp will think twice before bringing her problems into spaces where decent people are trying to enjoy their day." I touched my burning cheek, feeling the tears that I had been holding back finally spill over. But as I stood there, humiliated and in pain, I felt my daughter move inside me again, and I remembered something important. I wasn't just Elena the homeless woman. I wasn't just Elena the victim of circumstances beyond my control. I was Elena Thornfield, wife to one of the most powerful men in the world, and this woman had just made the biggest mistake of her life. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. Because sometimes the most devastating revenge comes from patience. From letting your enemies believe they've won while you prepare to show them exactly how wrong they were. I looked Vivian directly in the eyes, memorizing her face, her voice, her cruel smile. And I made her a silent promise that she would regret this moment for the rest of her life. Little did she know, her world was about to change forever. The burning sensation on my cheek reminded me of something my mother once told me. Sometimes life tests you not to break you, but to show you exactly how strong you really are. As I stood there in that shopping plaza, tasting blood and feeling the weight of dozens of judgmental stares, I knew this moment would define not just my future, but the future of everyone who had ever been made to feel small by people like Vivian Ashworth. I walked away from that plaza with my head held high, even though my heart was breaking, not because of the physical pain, but because I realized I had been living a lie for 3 weeks. I had been so afraid of appearing weak to Alexander, so determined to prove I could handle anything life threw at me, that I had allowed pride to nearly destroy everything we had built together. That evening, parked behind a 24-hour diner where the staff had grown accustomed to seeing me, I finally did what I should have done weeks ago. I borrowed a phone from Maria, the night manager who had become something of a guardian angel to me, always making sure I had access to their restroom and occasionally sliding me a free meal when her boss wasn't looking. My hands shook as I dialed Alexander's number, not from cold or hunger, but from the fear that 3 weeks of silence might have changed everything between us. When he answered on the first ring, his voice filled with desperate relief, I realized I had underestimated the depth of his love for me. "Elena?" "Oh God, Elena, where have you been? I've been going crazy with worry. Your family said they hadn't heard from you, and when I couldn't reach you..." His voice broke slightly, and I could hear the pain I had caused him by disappearing from his life. Alexander, I whispered, my voice cracking as 3 weeks of suppressed emotion finally found its release. I need you. I'm in trouble, and I don't know how to fix it anymore. Within 20 minutes, a black SUV pulled into the diner parking lot, and Alexander stepped out like an answer to every prayer I hadn't dared to speak. He looked exactly as I remembered. Tall, commanding presence, dark hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it, which he did when he was stressed. But when he saw me sitting in my car, his composed business facade crumbled completely. He approached my car slowly, as if I might disappear if he moved too quickly. And when our eyes met through the window, I saw something I had never seen before. Alexander Thornfield, the man who commanded boardrooms and controlled billions of dollars, was crying. I opened the car door and fell into his arms, feeling safe for the first time in weeks. He held me like I was the most precious thing in the world, whispering apologies and promises into my hair while I sobbed against his chest. I'm so sorry, I kept repeating. I should have called you sooner. I was just so ashamed, so scared you'd think I was weak. Weak? He pulled back to look at me, his hands gently framing my face. Elena, you survived 3 weeks on your own while pregnant. You protected our daughter when you had nothing. You are the strongest person I know, and I should have been there to protect you both. That night he took me to his penthouse, and as I soaked in a marble bathtub that was larger than some apartments I'd lived in, I told him everything. Every detail of how Cassandra had betrayed me, every night I'd slept in my car, every moment of fear and desperation I'd experienced. But when I got to the incident with Vivian Ashworth, something in Alexander's expression changed. The gentle, loving man who had been holding me and promising everything would be okay transformed into someone I had only heard about in business magazines. The ruthless CEO who had built an empire by never letting anyone who wronged him escape consequences. His jaw tightened, his eyes grew cold, and when he spoke, his voice carried a promise that made me shiver. Tell me her name again, he said quietly, already reaching for his phone. Alexander, what are you going to do? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. I'm going to make sure she understands exactly what happens when someone hurts my family, he replied. And I realized that Vivian Ashworth had awakened something in my husband that she was completely unprepared to face. Over the next week, while I recovered from my ordeal in the safety and comfort of our real home, Alexander began what he called gathering information. What I learned was that my husband didn't just own a company, he owned a network of resources that could discover everything about a person's life within days. Vivian Ashworth, it turned out, was married to Richard Ashworth, a moderately successful real estate developer whose company had been struggling with debt for the past 2 years. They lived in an expensive house they could barely afford, drove luxury cars that were mostly financed, and maintained their wealthy lifestyle through a combination of credit and Richard's increasingly desperate business deals. More importantly, Vivian's entire social status depended on the perception that she belonged among the city's elite. She served on several charity boards, organized fundraising events, and had built her identity around being seen as successful and important. Her cruelty toward me wasn't just random meanness. It was the behavior of someone who felt threatened by anyone who might expose the fragility of her carefully constructed image. She's vulnerable, Alexander explained as we sat in his home office, going through the reports his team had compiled. Her whole world depends on other people's respect and admiration. She's terrified that someone will discover she's not as secure as she pretends to be, so she attacks people she perceives as weaker to make herself feel powerful. What are you planning? I asked, though I was beginning to understand that whatever he had in mind would be far more sophisticated than simple revenge. Alexander smiled, but it wasn't the warm, loving smile I was used to. This was the smile of a man who had built a $40 billion empire by thinking several moves ahead of his opponents. I'm going to give her exactly what she deserves. A chance to see how it feels when someone with real power decides you don't deserve basic human dignity. The plan he outlined was brilliant in its complexity and devastating in its precision. Alexander didn't just want to hurt Vivian. He wanted to dismantle her entire world piece by piece, showing her exactly how powerless she really was when faced with someone who actually controlled the resources she only pretended to have. First, he bought the debt on Richard's real estate company, not through Thornfield Industries, but through a shell company that specialized in distressed assets. Overnight, The Ashworths went from owing money to various creditors to owing everything to an anonymous corporation that had the legal right to call in their loans at any time. Next, he used his connections in the luxury goods industry to ensure that Vivian's favorite stores and restaurants would suddenly become less welcoming to her. Not banned, nothing that could be traced back to him, but the kind of subtle social freezing that someone like Vivian would notice immediately. Reservations became harder to get, personal shoppers became less available, and the VIP treatment she was accustomed to simply evaporated. But the masterstroke was what he did with the charity boards she served on. Alexander's foundation was a major donor to several organizations, and when he quietly mentioned that he was reconsidering his support due to concerns about board leadership, several of those organizations suddenly found reasons to restructure their leadership teams. Within 2 weeks of the shopping plaza incident, Vivian's perfect life began developing cracks that she couldn't understand or fix. Her husband's business was facing sudden financial pressure, her social calendar was mysteriously becoming less full, and her position in the charity world was becoming increasingly precarious. But Alexander wasn't finished. The most devastating part of his plan was yet to come. 3 weeks after that terrible day, I was 8 months pregnant and glowing with the happiness that comes from being loved and protected by someone who would move mountains for you. Alexander had arranged for us to attend a charity gala benefiting children's services, an event that was particularly meaningful to both of us, given what we had learned about how many pregnant women in crisis had nowhere to turn for help. The gala was being held at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, the most exclusive venue in the city, and as we walked into the ballroom, I felt like I was entering a fairy tale. My dress was custom designed to accommodate my pregnancy while making me feel beautiful, and the necklace Alexander had given me for our anniversary sparkled with diamonds that caught the light from the crystal chandeliers. "Are you ready for this?" Alexander asked softly as we paused at the entrance to the ballroom. I looked around the room full of wealthy, powerful people and smiled. "I'm ready for anything as long as you're with me." That's when I saw her. Vivian Ashworth was standing near the auction display, wearing a dress that was obviously expensive, but somehow looked desperate, as if she was trying too hard to prove she belonged. Her jewelry was flashy but lacked the understated elegance that true wealth preferred, and her makeup was applied with the heavy hand of someone who was fighting to maintain an image that was slipping away from her. She was talking animatedly to a small group of women, clearly trying to maintain her position as a social leader, but I could see the strain in her smile and the way the other women's attention kept wandering to more interesting conversations happening around them. "Mrs. Thornfield," a warm voice said beside me, and I turned to find Catherine Morrison, the event organizer, approaching with a genuine smile. "We're so honored to have you and Mr. Thornfield here tonight. Your foundation's support has made such a difference for so many families in crisis." The conversation that followed was everything the night at Meridian Shopping Plaza hadn't been. People approached us with respect, with genuine interest in our foundation's work, with gratitude for the resources we provided to help pregnant women and young families in need. I found myself telling stories about the women we'd helped, sharing the joy of knowing that no one else would have to sleep in their car because they had nowhere else to go. As the evening progressed, I noticed Vivian trying to work her way closer to our group, clearly recognizing the social importance of being seen talking to the Thornfields, though she obviously had no idea who I was. Her attempts to insert herself into conversations were becoming increasingly awkward, as other attendees politely but firmly maintained distance from her. That's when Alexander made his move. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, taking the microphone as the evening's program began. "Before we begin tonight's auction, I'd like to share a story with you. A story about the importance of treating every person with dignity and respect, regardless of their circumstances." The ballroom grew quiet, hundreds of faces turning toward the stage where my husband stood with the kind of commanding presence that made people stop everything to listen. 4 weeks ago, my wife was physically assaulted in a public place by a woman who thought she had the right to judge someone based on their appearance. This woman saw a pregnant woman sitting on a public bench and decided that she was entitled to humiliate, threaten, and ultimately strike my wife because she perceived her as powerless. A murmur went through the crowd, shock and outrage rippling across the ballroom as people processed what Alexander was saying. This woman called my wife worthless, suggested her child should be taken away from her, and ultimately felt so confident in her superiority that she physically attacked a pregnant woman in front of dozens of witnesses. Quote, "I saw Vivian's face drain of color as she realized what was happening. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape route, But she was trapped in the middle of the ballroom, with hundreds of the city's most influential people staring at the stage. "That woman is here tonight," Alexander continued, his voice carrying easily across the silent room. "And I think it's important that everyone understand exactly what kind of person attacks a pregnant woman for the crime of being tired." The spotlight that had been illuminating Alexander suddenly swung across the crowd, searching until it found Vivian standing frozen in the middle of the ballroom. She was trapped in a circle of light, surrounded by people who were now looking at her with disgust and disbelief. "Vivian Ashworth," Alexander said, his voice carrying across the room like a judge pronouncing sentence. "Would you like to explain to everyone here why you thought it was acceptable to strike my wife?" The silence that followed was deafening. Vivian stood in the spotlight, her mouth opening and closing without sound, her perfect facade crumbling in front of everyone she had ever tried to impress. The women she had been talking to earlier stepped away from her as if she were contagious, and I could see the exact moment when she realized that her social life, her reputation, everything she had built her identity around, was disintegrating in real time. She finally managed to speak, her voice barely a whisper that the microphone system picked up and amplified throughout the ballroom. "I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" Alexander pressed, his tone polite but relentless. "You didn't know that pregnant women deserve basic human respect? You didn't know that physical violence is wrong? Or you didn't know that the woman you attacked might have people who love her enough to ensure there are consequences for your actions?" Vivian's legs seemed to give out, and she swayed slightly, caught between the urge to run and the impossibility of escape. Security guards had quietly positioned themselves at the exits, not to prevent her from leaving, but to ensure that when she did leave, it would be with the understanding that she was no longer welcome in these circles. "The Thornfield Foundation," Alexander continued, addressing the crowd now rather than Vivian, "exists to help families in crisis. Women like my wife, who through no fault of their own, find themselves vulnerable and in need of support. We believe that every person deserves dignity, compassion, and the chance to rebuild their lives when circumstances beyond their control leave them struggling." The applause that erupted was thunderous, but it wasn't celebratory. It was the sound of a community rejecting someone who had violated their values, who had revealed herself to be fundamentally incompatible with the principles they claimed to uphold. As the spotlight finally moved away from Vivian, I watched her stumble toward the exit, her expensive dress and flashy jewelry now looking like a costume that no longer fit. Her husband Richard, who had been standing in shocked silence near the back of the room, hurried after her, his face red with embarrassment and anger. But Alexander wasn't finished with them yet. Over the following months, the consequences of that night continued to unfold with mathematical precision. Richard's real estate company, crushed by debt and abandoned by investors who no longer wanted to be associated with the Ashworth name, declared bankruptcy. Their house, their cars, their membership to exclusive clubs, everything that had defined their place in society disappeared piece by piece. Vivian, stripped of her social status and facing a community that now saw her as a symbol of cruelty and prejudice, found herself experiencing exactly what she had wished on me: isolation, judgment, and the constant struggle to maintain dignity when the world seemed determined to strip it away. But the most beautiful part of Alexander's revenge wasn't the destruction of their lifestyle. It was what he built from the ashes of their downfall. The money from Richard's bankrupted company went toward purchasing a building that became the Elena Thornfield Center for Families in Crisis, a comprehensive facility providing temporary housing, job training, childcare, and support services for pregnant women and young families who needed a safe place to rebuild their lives. 6 months after that terrible day in the shopping plaza, I stood in the lobby of the center, holding our beautiful daughter Lily in my arms, watching as Maria, the diner manager who had helped me make that crucial phone call, ribbon-cut the opening ceremony for the transitional housing program she now managed. The center helped over 300 families in its first year, providing not just shelter and resources, but dignity and hope to people who had been told by society that they didn't matter. Every family that found stability through our program was living proof that Vivian Ashworth had been wrong about everything. Wrong about who deserves compassion, wrong about what determines a person's worth, and wrong about the power of love to transform lives. As for Vivian herself, I heard she eventually found work at a nonprofit organization that served homeless families. Whether it was genuine remorse or simply the only job she could find, I chose to believe that perhaps her experience had taught her something about empathy and the importance of treating every person with dignity. Standing in that center, surrounded by families who had found hope again, I realized that the most powerful revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's proving them wrong by building something beautiful from the pain they caused you. Every mother who didn't have to sleep in her car, every child who grew up in stability instead of chaos, every family that discovered their own strength with the right support, they were all living testimonies to the fact that love and determination can overcome even the cruelest intentions. If this story touched your heart, remember that every person you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about. Choose kindness over judgment, compassion over cruelty, and never underestimate the power of treating others with dignity. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that their current circumstances don't define their worth, and comment below about a time when someone's kindness changed your life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.